And then the other area in this world of kind of big data and data-driven is what I mentioned earlier, which is this is no longer about just serving out your insights to business intelligence applications. That is still really important. We all need reports. We all need better reporting tools. Things like I mentioned, Tableau, Click, Zoom Data, those types of things. We need those better reporting applications because you've got to be able to visualize what you find in order for people to really understand it. When it comes to analytical insights, words don't cut it. Visualizations really do. So it still is vitally important to be able to deliver a lot of those reports out throughout your whole agency and with all the folks you work with and out to your constituency base. But possibly even more important now is you can start to deliver those insights directly out to applications. So one of the ways it manifests itself is in recommendations. For example, back to that Kentucky and the weather thing, don't take that road because it's full of snow and there's an accident. Take that road instead because we've already cleared it and we know our folks are out there and we know that everything's safe on that road. So recommendations directly out to mobile and web applications is one of the first areas that you can really start to advance this sort of idea of automated decision making. And then also, one of the simplest things you can do on top of these big data systems is to index your data and just provide it for search. And it's one of the greatest ways that people are, simple and easy ways that people are actually adding a lot of value. So I was just talking with somebody earlier that was mentioning one of the states, somewhere on the East Coast, is actually pulling in a lot of their court system data. And they're indexing it in certain ways so that the litigators, we're going to pay $10 a month, can come onto that system and just search for certain documents and get those documents back. So you store all the documents in the system, you put the index in just like your Google search, but you did it on your own system with your own set of data, and they've now created a new service that they can offer to their constituents and a little revenue stream to go along with that new service. So customers across all industries and certainly citizens across the board have high expectations for services and products these days. And I think one of the big things that we're also seeing is this convergence now of the digital and the physical world. So the keynote this morning was a lot about the digital world, and I think we're all kind of in the digital world, right? We're sleeping with our smartphones whether we want to say it or not. And oh, by the way, usually people want to know, technically, what does it mean to sleep with my smartphone? How far away does it have to be from me? I call it within arm's reach. You got it. Yeah, within arm's reach. That's considered sleeping with your smartphone. So we're in a digital world, let's face it, and we all use digital properties all the time. What's happening now, though, is the convergence of the digital and the physical world. And that's when people start talking about the Internet of Things and machine-to-machine and sensors and all that kind of stuff. You know what? It's a pretty simple concept. It's if we can put instrumentation on anything that's physical, that instrument's going to give us data. And the data is going to tell us how well is that physical thing behaving. Can I be used it for something different? Now think about the application of that. First of all, when we instrument our own bodies, we're looking for data that basically say, how's my health? How well am I doing with some of my fitness challenges and all that? But that instrumentation has been carried to many different levels. There's some work done between the company I work for and Intel and the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Institute on Parkinson's patients. They change almost on a minute-to-minute basis based upon what's happening in their environment and potentially with what kind of medications they're on. And it's really hard, the traditional way that a Parkinson's patient logs what happens to them on a daily basis is to write it down in a notebook. And so now they're working on instrumenting even things like rugs. So in a household, when you're walking across a rug, it would be able to say whether your gait had changed and your path had changed. And those types of things are going to enable healthcare providers to give better care to folks, to get a better understanding much earlier on in the process as to what's happening. And when we think about Internet of Things, what can you instrument? Well, anything that's physical. So obviously, the idea of connected cars and all that kind of stuff. There's a billboard somewhere in the UK where they were trying to entice some of their citizens to donate blood. And on the billboard, there was a woman who needed blood donations, and you could walk by and download an app and say, if I donated blood, what would the difference be for her? And they kind of show the blood bank for her going up and her health improving. But even that's like an interesting, kind of augmented reality of thinking about instrumenting things to give you a visualization as to how you might help change the world. And obviously, in the roles that you're in, everything about making the resources of California work more effectively is important. And that's everything from environmental resources to the concepts of smart cities, which as more and more of our population continues to move to cities, we have to make them smarter in order to more effectively use those resources and ensure the safety and the health and the security and the convenience of people who are moving into those cities. That's what IoT is. It's just about instrumenting the physical world so we can understand it better so that we can use the resources more effectively. So when I work with our customers globally, by now in the conversation, a lot of them are saying, ooh, I don't know how to do this stuff. These people sound like they must have hired, those kind of crazy data scientists that no one knows where to get. And it's true. No one really knows where to get those crazy data scientists because they didn't even exist a few years ago. This is all new. And so what we basically say is you can apply a lot of the common sense that you've always applied in your roles to this new world of big data. Our most successful customers do 5 kind of straightforward and simple things. They do build a data-driven culture. They start talking about data. They start putting data at the forefront. In organizational meetings with high levels, they start showing how much data they have and how people are using data. In order to get people across the board to understand better that they need to be creating better data, and they need to be collecting better data, and they need to be thinking about how to use that data. And it's kind of the soft side of it, but when that number one isn't done right, none of the rest of this really works because you fall back to what people in IT have been doing for decades, which is to just go collect just enough to answer that one question. And when you just go collect just enough to answer that one question, all these other ideas that we're talking about, you won't be able to actually fulfill and do anything with. The second one is obviously, no-brainer, collect the right team and skills. Training. It's kind of amazing. I've seen many IT shops try to take people who are Oracle DBAs or have been doing something a certain way for a couple years, greatly skilled people, but don't train them on how to do something in a very different way. On the data science side, you can hire people right out of university. You can get interns who know how to do this stuff, but they have to be helped by people like you who have been in the world of the public sector for a long time and understand how the public sector works. So I always call that kind of the concept of the hybrid data science, where put the right people together, connect them together, and as long as they're curious about data and you get them trained up, you're going to be successful, because I've seen it happen everywhere. Agile, always a fun conversation on Agile, where folks say, yeah, I am an Agile shop, so then, yeah, we're okay. Or we're thinking about it, but we can't get there yet, or we're going to do a 1-year study on how to get to Agile. And when it comes to that one, I always say, if you're not really using Agile methodology yet, first of all, don't go and hire an Agile expert, because they will spend a year making you so inflexible on how you do Agile that you will never be Agile. But there are some very, very common sense, simple things you can do to change up your environment to start to become more agile. And we've got a lot of these documented on our websites, and we can help you with some of this, like just really simple, common sense ways of changing. I also hear from customers who say, okay, so now we did okay. We got an executive to buy in and sponsor us. We're starting to talk about this differently. We have a few new skill sets. We've trained up a few people, and we found some stuff. We have no idea how to get into production, because our production IT teams say, we don't know what that is. And our job is to actually keep our systems reliable, and we don't change them very often. And so how do you bridge that world of Agile with the world of IT? And IT's right. They've got to keep those production systems up and running and highly reliable. Well, there's concepts that we have all applied in the world of web development, where web development was Agile, and somehow we managed to bridge that world of web development over to a production deployment, and it's through this concept of DevOps, which simply starts as putting a set of people in the middle that can talk between the two groups and handhold and eventually get to automation of being able to move things from the world of development to the world of operations. DevOps has not been applied to data. If you go out and actually look at it, there's very little that's really been talked about in that world. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this happen over the course of the next couple decades. And then, I'm talking to you about collecting data before you know how it's going to be used and being really agile. And then folks say, so you mean that we're not going to govern our data anymore? It's like, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, you're going to do more governance of your data, but you're going to do it in a very different way, which is why I call it right-sizing your data governance. So instead of everything being known and set before you ever collect the data, you're going to do things like land it into areas that are locked down for use by only a certain set of people who will do work to govern and clean up that data and make subsets of it available to other people. So everything around data governance now comes much more along the lines of being able to track lineage and being able to make sure that your data is being used appropriately. So we just have some concepts that we can help lay out for you, which shows you kind of that life cycle of data along the way. So that's why we say right-size your data governance. You're going to still have data governance. You're going to end up having more of it, but it's going to be put into different places and used in different ways. And I mentioned earlier, traditional statistics used a sample set of data to come up with their modeling and their insights. And now we're talking about full populations of data. One other way to think about this too is that your full populations of data are needed on the development side when people are really running those machine learning models and looking for things that they didn't know existed before. But when it gets to production, quite often a lot less of the data is actually needed to touch your production systems. And that again is like that inverse world. That's a little bit different than it was in the traditional world. So I think one of the best ways to summarize how our most successful customers go about this is expressed in this way. First of all, being data-driven, moving towards these big data systems, thinking about the 5 things that I told you, data-driven cultures and assembling the right teams, this is not your next 18-month project. This is a 2-decade journey. Now, I say 2 decades. One of the founders of our company, Amar Awadallah, was being interviewed by a magazine in Malaysia, and he was quoted as saying it's a 4-decade journey. I saw him the next week and I said, Amar, 4 decades, man, I'm not going to live that long. And he said, Amy, remember precision medicine? Don't worry, they'll get your genome and they'll get you all fixed up and you'll be perfectly fine. But this is that big of a shift. It's not the next system you're rolling into a data center. It's not the next chunk of services you're peeling off from a cloud somewhere. It's a change in how you run your agency or your business. It's a change in putting data at the center of everything, followed by processing and automated decision making. So another way to think about this is to think big. So in the sense of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, what are the big things that you need to accomplish? Set those objectives, but then start small. Remember, we said agile. So start small. And some of the first use cases we see people do is to just simply take one data set that they never looked at before and just start to analyze it and see what they can find from it. One of the ones that I see very often on the commercial side is web clickstream data. So we all have websites, and we look at stats that come off of some of our web vendors. But when you actually go and you take the detailed clickstream data, it's interesting the types of things that you can find, where some people are hovering around certain pages quite often, maybe looking for something that they can't find. And that kind of path analysis is something that's helped quite a number of businesses and agencies to improve even their web performance, or not so much their web performance, but their interactions of their consumers or constituents with their web properties. So start small. And then also, we always like to say, kind of also find a shiny ball. Find something that like people have always talked about, that it would be really cool if you could do it. Grab some external data, maybe this weather data and something you're currently doing. Just do an experiment so that you come up with this little shiny ball that you can show folks. And that, by doing something that's realistic, that's small, that you know how to do, and by doing the shiny ball thing, you can get people's attention because they can say, pragmatically, we're going to be able to do this, but wow. And those are the other kinds of things we're going to be able to learn. And then iterate often. Iterate, iterate, iterate. Every 2 weeks, every month, should be moving down that path towards more data, more detailed analysis, better insights delivered out in a way that's actionable, moving from standard reports to integration with real-time applications that are in people's hands. So in a nutshell, I think government leaders all certainly have renewed missions these days to deploy radically improved services. I would imagine probably with less budget. And you know what? You got to be innovative in order to really survive in that kind of environment. When you're already dealing with a constituency base, including yourselves, who are sleeping with your smartphones, this is what people expect. They expect services that are going to tell them where to go and what to do and what's happening there. And when they're safe and when they're not, and how to communicate with folks. So we all have these radically renewed missions to do things in new and different ways, and in ways that are incredibly secure, because you can't take the chance of going out and building a new service that uses data to provide better services for your constituents in any way that compromises privacy and security. So it's got to be done with privacy and security woven in all throughout. So data is the key to achieving these missions. I believe it's passion for data is the key throughout all of this, a passion for moving fast, a passion for learning new things, because this is the biggest shift I've seen in IT in my long career. And so this has got to become a passion for folks for continuous learning and going towards new things. It's fun. You're going to find really cool things and make really big differences. So I think most importantly, think big, start small, iterate often, and you will be successful with this stuff. So with that, I would be happy to take questions.
So how do you use, what are your use cases in the telco space? You said Cloudera is used by 9 out of 10 telcos.
Yep. So what are the use cases in the telco space? They fall into three categories. I could talk for telco forever, but let me just tell you the three categories. Almost every telco globally is in a highly competitive environment. And so the first thing that they all need to know, and you guys are all telco customers, is they want to know more about you so that they can better predict, number one use case, when you're going to churn and go, you ready to buy your next device? Is your contract up? If you're prepaid, are you not topping off? So all of those types of things are in their number one use case because they don't want you to churn and go with one of their competitors. So there's a whole slew of use cases around understanding the customer base better. That is no different than public sector, which there's a whole slew of use cases around understanding the constituency base better. The second area in telco is understanding their networks. Where do they have quality problems and where do they have bandwidth or capacity problems? I know when I drive up Route 495 in Massachusetts, there's a certain spot that my phone call will drop every single time, and I think it's 2017, and they haven't fixed that yet. You know, there's just some little, missed spot between a couple cell towers there. So across the world, telcos are analyzing how their networks are being used and where they have quality problems and where they have bandwidth problems, because they have a very large capital-intensive initiatives to be building out next-generation telco services, and they need to provision those services in a way that's very cost-effective and only put them out in certain places where they're really going to get their return on investment. And in that same space, telcos are all moving towards new technology, the software-defined networking, network function virtualization, which will really become networks that are making much more automated decisions to change your routing based upon where you are and what the capacity currently is. But that's kind of their more 2025 types of goals. And then, so that's the second space, understanding the network better. And the third space is around managing risk. Telcos, like almost everyone else, they have huge regulatory compliance around data privacy, consumer. And when you look globally, if you look at like the Freedom Act here, if you look at some of the recent changes here where, sure, they can use everything. If you look at the EU, if you look at the UK just making some suggestions, they're going to even change privacy policies towards a looser way. Those policies are all changing drastically, and so telcos are right smack in the middle of that. Sometimes they're being asked to hold data for longer periods of time, and sometimes they're being asked to ensure that when someone asks for their data to be deleted, that they can fully comply with that deletion. So those are the three main areas of kind of strategic initiatives.
So on the last point with data privacy, you mentioned like global initiatives. In the U.S., the FCC is preempting ISPs to convert them back to Title I, and basically saying that they're not a common carrier, they're a information service provider. So that means that data privacy is going to be really taken out of the hands of even organizations like yours. But the FCC is going to say, states can't regulate it because it's federally preempted.
Yeah, so the point is around who actually is regulating data privacy, and what can we all do about it. From the perspective of what my company builds, is we build a system that's flexible, that lets you set all the controls about who can use the data down on the data itself. So, which I believe is exactly what's needed, because this world of data privacy and regulation and legislation is going to continue to change for the next 2 decades. We're not going to be able to keep up with it. So if we are building security controls up in applications, think about it. Every time something new comes along, a new executive order, somebody makes a change here, there's so many multinational connections that happen where you have to consider where the data is coming from and flowing to, that you've got to be able to secure the data down at the data itself, administer it down there, and change those controls. And that's one of the other big differences in this big data system, in that all of those security controls and the lineage and the audit of that data happens down at the data, so that it will hopefully make it easier as you need to change, something new comes out and you need to change to comply with some new legislation, or the constituency base is demanding a different level of privacy, that you'll be able to change it by setting the controls differently down on the data itself.
But it seems like we're going to have to redefine privacy, because people are putting a lot of people are putting all this stuff at Facebook and Twitter, every single reaction they have, and then yet for the government it's like you need to manage your data more private. Like, you are already open yourself to the social media, but yet here we are trying to collect some data for making better policies, to make better decisions, to optimize resources, and we need to still deal with the idea of privacy.
Yes.
So it seems like the way I just started perceive this is like the word privacy needs to be redefined again. Because what is now when you have so much out there about you in the social media?
Great point. So the point is that the word privacy may even need to be defined. What we mean by privacy may need to be redefined, and I completely agree. Privacy to you is different than privacy to you. It's different than privacy to me or to my 2 daughters. And that means that we're going to be dealing with the need to actually manage 2 different people's privacy expectations, along with aligning that to formal privacy policies that are written, and aligning that to whatever kinds of government policies and legislation is put out at the same time. I think it is one of the biggest challenges we're going to face over the course of the next couple of decades, quite frankly, because a lot of people that are working in this space don't think about privacy. And even like simple things like in telcos, often, I don't know if you guys realize, when you are opening apps, at a certain point in time, sometimes you're consenting for them to use things. And it's like, why am I giving them consent now? And how's that related to the overall thing that I clicked on up at the beginning, which was 152 pages, which I never read anyways. So all of that absolutely is going to change.
And even the word governance.
Yes.
Because it seems like, okay, Google has all the data that the government probably should have. So now who is going to be the government? Because they're driving a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
All this data that people are putting out there, all the internet is driving a new concept of governance, a new concept of privacy, a new concept of...
Yeah, absolutely. So
where is the government adding value?
Right, and again, the point being privacy and governance are all changing, and I think that actually is the point, is privacy and governance. All of our expectations and what we're doing is changing and will continue to change. So probably the most important thing we can take away from that is we need to be prepared to keep up with the change, and we also need to be prepared to understand and advocate for the appropriate changes. I think we are so far away from having a general public understanding as to how any of our data is being used, how we want it to be used. There's actually a couple telcos that are starting to work on services where they would offer to the consumer an understanding as to who was actually using their data and in different ways. So we're going to see different things like that. But I think the most important point here is that that particular space of privacy and expectations and governance is an area that's going to continue to change. So it's not like next year somebody's going to come out with a definition of privacy that will hold for the next 20 years. It's going to keep changing, which is why I go back to it's important to be able to control the privacy settings, the authentication, the authorization on the data itself, and let that propagate through to the applications. If you have to change every application that you have when some new concept of privacy comes up, then you're never going to be able to keep up with it.
So in terms of the data security, the current development for the big data or data lake framework compared to the traditional data warehouse?
Yes, so differences in security in this kind of big data environment that I'm talking about here, particularly in the one that Cloudera works on versus traditional, there's a couple different things. First of all, we've got the 4 pillars of security, which is authentication. So you need to know that the person who's trying to access data is the person. So that's all done through Kerberos and a lot of the standard mechanisms. There's access control. We've done a lot of work on access control that starts to let you be able to say down to a cell level of data. Like if you think about traditional row and column kind of table where you gave somebody access to the whole thing or just certain rows, we're working on getting down to a cell level of data. So if you thought about maybe a data set that was constituency-based, had identifiers and geolocation, you might want certain applications to only have access to certain constituents in certain geolocations. So our access control lets you get down to that level of being able to say that. Then you need to be able to audit it. You need to be able to say, I can actually see how this data flows through the system, how it's been transformed and who's touched it. And that's kind of auditing the lineage and being able to report on that. And so those are some of the things that we've got in the system, as well as encryption. So we acquired a company a couple of years ago that was an encryption company that's used in all the kind of major Intel-ish type systems that we know of in the world. And so we've got really strong encryption. Cloudera was one of our big funders and partners is Intel. So in the area of security, we're doing a lot of work with Intel, and they're taking a lot of the software that we write in our platform and starting to push that logic down into the chipsets so that things will become even more secure. So encryption could be done by the chips themselves and no longer has to be done up in the software. So it's a major area of focus.
So can we conclude the security is more secure with today's technology? Or is still developing?
So everything will continue to be developing because, as I think we all know, while we all work on security, there are people out there who are working on figuring out how to break through security, right? And so, but it's also an interesting big data use case. One of the primary ones in mitigating risk, our systems and data is used a lot extensively for cybersecurity threats. Because if you think about how do you really determine when you have an unknown cybersecurity threat? You go after all the data you possibly could get to, and you use machine learning to find anomalies, do an anomaly detection. So yeah, 2 things. One, yes, we're hyper-focused on ensuring the security controls in the system will enable you to not get into a situation where you would have a cybersecurity threat, yet you can also use the system and the data to really avert cybersecurity threats themselves. Other questions? All right, well, thank you guys.